Alright, YouTube. Today I thought I'd cover the topic of homosexuality. Still, even after all of these years of progress on the issue, it's still considered somewhat of a taboo subject. There are a lot of people, and I've noticed this, there are a lot of people who support gay marriage, who support individuals being able to live their lives the way they wish to lead them, that don't speak on the topic because they're afraid of people thinking that they're gay as well. Personally, I've gone past that. I no longer care. I understand that by opening up such a topic, I will be trolled and called, a fag or whatever. That doesn't really bother me. I'm straight. I don't have a problem with it. I also don't have a problem with individuals being gay. I have an uncle who's gay. I have several gay friends. It doesn't bother me in the least. The notion that a person, by virtue of being homosexual, is somehow sexually interested in all members of their own gender is a ploy by Judeo-Christians in order to label it a mental disease. The idea that somehow, for instance, people saying, well, I won't hire a gay nanny because they might molest my kids or something. The idea that gay automatically means that you indiscriminately target all other individuals within your gender, of course, roots in the sort of 1940s and 50s homophobia, the idea that being gay, as well as masturbation, polygamy, any sort of non-marital sexual contact was the result of a mental disorder, roots back in the 1950s sort of, the gays must be communists sort of homophobia. And it's ridiculous. Of course, the title of this video, that being homosexual is fine and it's biologically normal, it is heralded in science as a completely biologically ordinary behavior. That is, from psychology's point of view, you can look at it this way. All adolescents which become mentally fit, normal adults do go through a homosexual phase. It's not a homosexual phase in that an adolescent seeks to mate with members of their own gender. It's a homosexual phase in that preferential interaction, romantic fantasy, and so forth runs particularly within their own gender. Because, of course, young males or females, they're indoctrinated into a Western-style culture, and I would argue, and I have argued for many years, psychology as it's practiced is predominantly Western. It doesn't take into consideration Eastern variants, and I think it's wrong in many ways. But at least looking at the normal Western-style cultures, all children, because of the segregation of gender at a young age, do tend to interact and thus fantasize about members of their own gender. Of course, they grow out of this normally. However, there are individuals who are biologically raised homosexual. It's not abnormal, it's not some sort of sin or perversion. The idea that homosexuality is a sin is also an antiquated view held by certain Christian groups. Of course, others have reworded the Bible, other groups have looked at the Bible and realized that in reality, homosexuality is only specifically pointed out in the Old Testament. That is, of course, in Leviticus, with the laws of the Old Testament, yes, homosexuality was considered a sin. What Christians often overlook is that the Old Testament laws, according to their own religion, are actually more or less invalidated, other than the Ten Commandments, by the New Testament and the New Covenant of Jesus Christ. That's just the Christian view. I'm not a Christian, so I don't care. But when they obsess over the topic of homosexuality, it seems a little strange. There are also individuals, like Rick Santorum, who talk about the subject constantly. It's like they don't think about anything else. Rick Santorum came out saying that gay marriage would endanger his ability to be in a normal heterosexual marital relation with his wife. I hesitate to guess under what possible guise he would assume that this was the case. Why would allowing state gay marriage endanger his ability to be in a straight marriage unless he's secretly gay, and that would allow him to cheat on his wife with a large black gay man or something along those lines? That seems to be what he's saying. So maybe Rick Santorum's homophobic but actually homosexual. And that's always possible. We've seen a somewhat unsettling trend in the last 20 or 30 years where a lot of these bigoted, homophobic individuals, particularly in the evangelical right wing, turn out to be gay. We've seen it with senators and congressmen and preachers and activists all across the board, that all of these severely homophobic individuals turn out to be homosexual. We know Ted Haggard. Of course, Ted Haggard says, well, I fell into the temptation of sin and the devil blinded me. No, you're gay. You're just angry at yourself for some unknown reason. Maybe maybe you were beaten as a child and you think you don't measure up to your, father's severely strict standards or something. We don't know. Also, look at biology. We can look at the biological record, and I know that Christians and Muslims and so forth, they have difficulty with the topic of evolution. They deny that it's true. They think, all the species were somehow created at the same time 6,000 years ago. Most of them have moved past this nonsense. Some of them still hold to it, and those are the ones that unfortunately tend to be the most bigoted against gays. We see throughout history, of course, religion hates science. It tries to stifle science. Galileo, the world is round. Of course it's not round. The Bible says it's a flat circle. Of course there are corners in the world. Of course the heavens are supported by arches, and the Earth is the center of the solar system, the galaxy, and the universe. Of course, because we're special. All of these things over time, they don't bear out. We prove them wrong. It's only a matter of time before we have incontrovertible proof that homosexuality is perfectly normal. Until then, we at least have an overwhelming amount of evidence that that's the case. We look at, for instance, bonobos. Bonobos are a type of ape which are very closely related biologically to man. That's why they share most of their DNA with man. Anti-evolutionists can argue this all they want. Obviously, they failed biology, they failed genetics, they failed archaeology, they failed every other scientific field known to man. So their failures, their word really doesn't matter. And that's another thing. The gay community shouldn't take these fundies seriously, and little kids who are gay, they cry, oh, why don't people like me? Well, you know what? The fundamentalists, nobody likes them either, so don't really take them seriously. You don't really have to listen to what that fire and brimstone preacher says. He believes the world is 6,000 years old. Who cares? He's ignorant. We look at bonobos, and we see, lo and behold, and this has been documented time and time again, one of our closest living ape relatives prefers homosexual contact over heterosexual contact. The females are constantly on one another. The males are constantly sodomizing each other. They do this every single day. They love it. Only rarely do they undergo heterosexual sexual contact, and they do it for the purpose of procreation. They prefer homosexuality. We see it in many other kinds of animals. Everyone's seen 2 male cats humping, 2 male dogs humping. They just get off on it. It's a completely normal behavior. Now, I would stress that most of these individuals appear to be bisexual more than homosexual, and that's one thing I'd like to stress. It's my belief, and you can disagree with me if you want, and I have no proof of this. It's my belief that every individual and every creature on Earth is inherently bisexual. There are some individuals who have a very strong preference to their own or to the other gender. So while I have a very strong preference for females, under the right circumstances, I could go gay. I strongly believe that. I haven't done it so far, but I do acknowledge that it's possible. I believe that every Pat Robertson, Billy Graham, and, Ted Haggard on Earth would go gay under the right circumstances, if they weren't so indoctrinated into their dogma. I believe that most gay individuals would go straight under the right conditions. I believe bisexuality is the norm for human culture and for all animal cultures, because there are very few individuals within the animal kingdom who are purely straight or purely gay. So assuming that we evolved, that just logically follows. We're not really that different from animals. I see it from fundamentalists all the time as well. We're not animals, we're special. Because we've got a bigger brain, we've got a culture, we've got a language, whatever. We're still a biological species, which did in fact evolve from an ape-like ancestor all the way back to basically a scum pond where abiogenesis created the first proteins and fatty acids. That's where life came from. The fundamentalists can ignore and deny this fact, but science has bared it out fairly well, since Miller and Urey and Darwin all the way up through, slowly improving their theories to make them make more sense. And we've gotten to the point now where there's virtually incontrovertible evidence that we evolved, that all species did evolve. Quite frankly, the idea that aliens came down and transformed apes into humans makes more sense than the biblical story of creation. So that being said, I do not take the arguments of fundamentalist Christians, Muslims, or Jews very seriously. And in fact, here's another thing about homosexuality supporting the idea that it's perfectly normal. To those Christians out there, have you ever heard of the Berdaschi tradition? The Berdaschi, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that quite right, but I believe that's right. Native Americans. Oftentimes in Native American culture, this isn't universal across all tribes, but it is found in most tribes, they had various variants on this theme, that certain individuals, particularly males, would cross-dress. They would usually be considered as shaman. They were supposedly highly spiritual, and they would function as a member of that society as women. They would take a male husband and act the submissive female role. They were considered blessed individuals. That is across most Native American cultures, which of course were ironically wiped out by the highly homophobic Christians. You can look at certain Christian groups, and don't think that Christianity is one big hegemonic structure where all Christians believe the same thing. There are Christian groups who have no problem with homosexuality. The Episcopal Church has no problem with homosexuals. Episcopalians are essentially liberal Catholics. The Unitarians, which are essentially the most liberal Protestants, have no trouble with homosexuality. I would say personally, from my own perspective, those are the only two Christian groups which actually make sense. Other than the Gnostics, which probably don't hate homosexuals because of their belief in non-dichotomous truth and existence rather than dichotomous false, true, good and bad thought. It's true that there are many other groups on Earth which have no particular onus against homosexuals. Within Hindu culture, depending on the particular group, many of the groups see homosexuality as somewhat normal in certain instances. They have various sexual conduct pacts that they enter into. Of course, in Brazil and places in South America and Central America, in many ways, cross-dressing she-males are seen as women. It isn't a singular social structure. You see, we here in the United States have a problem. The evangelical Christians control a very large proportion of the media. They've got the individuals in this country convinced that homosexuality is a mental disorder, and that no other Christian culture blesses such unions. But in reality, most Christian cultures around the world have grown to the point where they understand the biological concepts behind homosexuality to a degree where they no longer prescribe a moral onus against them. Now, here's my thought. I would say that those Christians in the United States are the furthest from the truth. In reality, the reason why they believe homosexuality is amoral, somehow a mental disease, is because they've been tricked by the media, which is owned by a handful of extremely powerful elites. And the basic idea is to control religion and use it for political gain. It didn't even originate predominantly in the Christian church. It predominantly came to light because a handful of political ideologues wanted more votes. The same can be said true with abortion. Abortion did not start as a Christian issue of protecting unborn fetuses. Abortion originally started as an issue because urban doctors were tired of performing abortions because they had a high death rate. Of course, back then they did. And so they convinced the Christian leadership and the Christian-led right-wing media, oh, well, we don't want to perform abortions anymore. Well, it's immoral. The Bible says blah, blah, blah. And thus it became an issue. The same thing happened with gay rights. Here's my last thought. I don't believe that churches should be forced to perform gay marriages. If they don't believe in that sort of marriage, nobody has to adhere to that faith and go to that specific church for a wedding. You can go to an Episcopal or a Unitarian church for such a thing and they won't care. I do not believe it is the right or responsibility of the state to dictate sexual morality. To say that state marriages can only be between a man and a woman is blatantly unconstitutional. To put that limitation on individuals based on their sexual preference when they are both consenting, willful adults of a mental state which is able to comprehend such issues, to assume that that consensual relationship should take a second-class stance or tier is unconstitutional. The fact that any state bans gay marriage is not a testament to the protection of the traditional mode of marriage, because there is no traditional marriage. Let me tell you, there are a million different variants on it all around the world in different religions, languages, and cultures. Anyone who's studied anthropology understands this. There is no traditional marriage. So it's not about defending marriage, it's actually about defending Judeo-Christian right-wing hegemony. And it only became an issue because a handful of rich people wanted more votes. So I support gay rights. I believe that it should be federally amended that marriages shall be between any two consenting adults. Polygamy, on the fence about the issue. I don't really care if people enter into polygamous relationships either. Incest, of course, then you have the biological aspect to it, and pedophilia, of course, you can't give consent if you're that young. But as far as consensual relationships between adults, I'd say anyone who stands against that must not have read the Constitution, must not understand the Greco-Roman style secular law system which we use in the United States or in most parts of the Western world, and must not have studied biology or anthropology or any of those other sciences which fundamentalists largely ignore anyway because it goes against their Iron Age dogma. It's really rather sad. Peace out.